Good morning. Welcome to the First Unitarian Society of Madison. This is a community where curious seekers gather to explore spiritual, ethical, and social issues in an accepting and nurturing environment. Unitarian Universalism supports the freedom of conscience of each individual as together we seek to be a force for good in the world. My name is Dorrit Bergen, and on behalf of the congregation, I would like to extend a special welcome to visitors. We are a welcoming congregation, so whoever you are and wherever you are on your life's journey, we celebrate your presence among us. We trust that today's service will stimulate your mind, touch your heart, and stir your spirit. I invite you now into a few moments of contemplation, meditation, prayer, as we settle in and come fully into this time and place together.
I tried to climb a mountain. I tried to climb a mountain. Oh, author Tallulah Carroll Browning. I tried to climb a mountain.
To find peace.
It was too hard, but I kept trying. And when I climbed a tree, peace found me. We'll now have the lighting of the chalice. If you can please rise. Do you want to ring the gong? Okay. And I'll ask, oh, there's your door. Please read along with Atticus the words printed in your order of service.
Every living thing should be valued the same, even not living things should too. Everything should be kind to, speak for people, speak for friendship.
If you'll turn to your friends next to you and exchange a friendly morning greeting. Thanks. We're very excited this morning to have the FUS Dance Fellowship with us again today. Kathleen Conklin will be dancing to Bobby McFerrin's the 23rd Psalm, and we're going to invite all the children to come up. This is going to be our children's moment before summer fun, and you'll have a part to play, and Kathleen will explain that a little bit further. Turn it over to Kathleen.
Come up. Come up. Little people. Okay. Are we all here? I have a story. Long, long ago, there were no cell phones and no smartphones and no electronic tablets. How do you think people shared stories? I think they told stories and they wrote on paper. But long, long ago, in a land far away, there were no books and no pencils and no paper and no writing. And then people told their stories with language and with words, but even before that, there was dance. Dance was the word. Accepted from Cynthia Hoven, in the beginning, human beings were mute. We could not speak, but we could dance. Even as plants dance in the wind, as jellyfish dance in the water, as cilia dance in our bellies, we participated in the first dance of creation. The dance of our bodies has become small, but we have learned to dance with our words. With our speech, we can now name the birds and the beasts and the butterflies, the wind and the rain, thunder and lightning, sun and stars. The great creative mysteries of the word now live in our throats, and we can tell each other stories through our words. But how much do you think children remember of what they are told? Put up your hands. If you still have 10 digits, this is how much we remember of what we are told. So, in old time, humans moving celebrated their stories. They celebrated birthdays and mothers and daughters. They danced to weddings and funerals. They danced joy and laughter and their sorrow. They danced reverence and grace and the wonder of this world of sound. In our time, we have forgotten the ancient dances. I am sad that I cannot dance the ancient dances, so one day I learned to dance out loud. You want to dance out loud with me? So we're all going to dance out loud, if you will. If you look at the back of your program, the lyrics to Bobby McFerrin are printed, and we're going to just share with you how to move to the vowel sounds so that when we hear the music and you see the dance, you will feel that also. So ah, does anybody know what ah is? Ah. Thank you. Ah. And if you are shy, you can do ah. That's ah. And that's reverence, the shape of the chalice, receptivity. And then there's A. A. And A is like strong, like right, like an X. It's like stop, because it separates you from me and me from you. A. A. And then E. And E is me. This is me. This is whom I am on the other side of A. Huh? E. And then there's O, and the O is when a self-realized individual can move in collaboration with the community. O. And some of us take longer to be self-realized individuals to cooperate in the community. And then there's ooh, later in our life. Ooh, parallel all the way up from the earth to the heavens. And if you're shy. Okay, you ready to dance with me? Because in the words that you have in the program, the Lord, what is the Lord? There's an O, yeah? She will be, there's an E. You ready to dance with me? You don't have to, but you may. And if you do, you can stand up. You stay down here, and I'll move up here.
Our first reading today is The Mystic, the Scientist, and the Activist from the Tapestry of Faith, a UU curriculum. One day, a religious man approached a mystic and asked, "Does God exist?" "Allow me to go within for the answer," the mystic said. After meditating for quite some time, expanding her heart consciousness to embrace the totality of existence, she answered, "I do not know what you mean by the word God, but I do know that this world is more mysterious and more wonderful than I could ever imagine. I know that you and I are part of something so much larger than our own lives. Perhaps this is the something you seek." Then the religious man approached a scientist. "Does God exist?" he asked. "Let me think," the scientist replied. And so she thought. She thought about the vastness of the universe, 156 billion light years, and the almost immeasurable smallness of a quark. She thought of how the energy of the Big Bang fuels the beating of her own heart. And then she answered, "I do not know what you mean by the word God, but I do know that this world is more mysterious and more wonderful than I could ever imagine. I know that you and I are part of something so much larger than our own lives. Perhaps this something larger is what you seek." Then the religious man approached an activist. "Does God exist?" he asked. "Let me remember," the activist said. And so they remembered. They remembered all the different people of different faith and no faith with whom they had worked for justice over the years. They had seen people in desperate circumstances who had lost everything, still willing to reach out and help one another. They thought of how working for justice had saved them from a life of despair. And then they answered, "I do not know what you mean by the word God, but I do know that this world is more mysterious and more wonderful than I could ever imagine. I know that you and I are part of something so much larger than our own lives. Perhaps this something larger is what you seek." The religious man then thought to himself. He thought of what he knows and what he does not know. He thought about how he knows what he knows and how he knows he doesn't know what he doesn't know. He thought about his experience of the world and how it is but one infinitesimal fraction of all experience. He thought about his dependence on forces larger than himself, and he thought about the interdependence of all existence. He experienced wonder and pondered mystery. And then he knew. He knew in his soul the truth of what the mystic and the scientist and the activist said, that he is part of something so much larger than his own life. And then, only then, did he think about what he'd call it. Our second reading from Women Who Run with Wolves by Clarissa Pinkola Estes. A part of every woman and every man resists knowing that in all love relationships, death must have her share. We pretend we can love without our illusions of love dying. Pretend we can go on without our superficial expectations dying. Pretend we can progress and that our favorite flushes and rushes will never die. But in love, psychically, everything becomes picked apart. Everything. What dies? Illusions die. Expectations die. Greed for having it all. For wanting to have all be beautiful only. All this dies. Because love always causes a descent into the death nature. We can see why. And we can see why it takes abundant self-power and soulfulness to make that commitment. Thank you, Dan. To preach love is at best bad taste. Those are the words of prominent UU theologian James Luther Adams. Well, Dr. Adams, I'm afraid this sermon is going to be in bad taste. When I am asked how this year went for me, I can honestly say that I loved it. I snuck into this building my very first night back in Madison and stood, at what would have been this pulpit, seems like just a few weeks ago, and wondered what it would be like to preach here, to preach to a crowd gathered here. And it's top-notch. This sermon is about what I found here, and what I found here, and there, was love. But I get where Adams is coming from. There is no word in our language, he argues, that has been so much misused and prostituted as the word love. Love may be all you need in life, but it isn't going to make for interesting sermons. Adams' response to the abuse of this word was to give to ministers the unavoidable duty to make a cool and critical analysis of the phenomenon of love and to unmask pseudo-love. Doesn't that sound fun? So let's get to it. Let me start off by talking about my love of the sermon. Writing a sermon actually is a fairly lonely experience. You gather up some books, do some background reading on Wikipedia, maybe look at a few academic papers and studies if you're really trying to impress. And then you flounder around like the Dickens for something original to say. I don't know if Dickens flounder. I don't know what Dickens. Which mostly looks like staring out into space and heading to the kitchen for more snacks and playing a slow game of chess. But you do all of this mostly alone. And in the late stages of my sermon preparation, I will let one or two people look over it to see if it is completely off. But I have yet to cultivate a sizable group of pre-sermon readers, which is the practice of some. Now, this process isn't too different from most writers' methods, except their experience doesn't culminate in their writing being the hypothetical center point of a community's worship life every weekend. This mix of the solitary, the social, and the spiritual is a really unique, and at least for me, a highly rewarding experience. So, to make this process a reality, when writing a sermon, I, like many others, learned to cultivate a trusted group of internal conversation partners. Obvious ones are the writers of the materials you are consulting, but others come from other places in your past. I've tried to carefully craft this group of internal advisors. Seminary professors and theologians from my 3 years of study in Austin stay with me well. More recently, my internship supervisors, Michael and Kelly, as well as my dedicated and appreciated ministry team, have been added to that list. I also try very hard to listen to the voices of race, gender, and class theorists and activists who often have very legitimate critiques of the status quo of liberal religion and politics. But some voices you don't get to choose. One, for me, is the authoritative voice of my Mormon past, to which I spoke a little bit last month. It's hard to shut off a voice you spent the first 25 years of your life trying to obey. But that voice is starting to fade, or at least deeply shift. A voice that I would have never chosen, but yet persistently remains, finds its personification in a man I met here at church several years ago. Actually, I didn't really meet him. Rather, I sat next to him in the library for an hour during services, and we never talked to each other. But he definitely talked. First to himself, and then to what I assumed was his partner on the phone. He talked about how much he hated being dragged to these hippy-dippy services, where people get touchy-feely for an hour to pat themselves on the back for being good white people. I'm not a fan of this voice, but he is almost always there, in his ripped jeans and too big jacket. That day, as most days, I was actually really enjoying the service I'd chosen to give my Sunday morning to. But when he started talking, I immediately began to see things through his eyes. Like when an uninvited guest comes over to your messy home, and what was cozy and eclectic becomes scattered and depressing. It's that voice that society has trained me and plenty of the rest of us to listen to. He's on the cover of rock albums and the star of many films. The person who has seen behind all of society's surface niceties to see the real ugliness underneath. Consumerism loves him, encourages us to listen to him, because when he sells us something, we know he really means it, and that he would never sell anything just because the man tells him to. And he sits across from me every time I write a sermon, jeering at my attempts at sincerity and insight. I've learned to tolerate this voice, learn from it, if not appreciate it. Because despite how much I dislike him, I must acknowledge that he is just a little bit right. And he is definitely not alone. We all know those people who somewhere along the line got an extra dose of cynicism and too coolism. But society makes sure that all of us got a dose of the same medicine at some points in our lives. I've seen the eyes cross, the arms cross, the eyes roll, the passive-aggressive email that got sent, all with the same underlying message. I see right through you, and I don't like what I see. What ripped jeans and baggy jacket taught me, more than anything else, is that what we have here is very fragile. So very fragile. And it is fragile not just because of the appearance of hypocrisy, but its constant, unavoidable presence in our midst. I read the other day that hypocrisy has become the cardinal sin of the millennial generation, and I knew right away this guy had never been to a UU church. We owned the sin of hypocrisy since way before Al Gore invented the internet. Whenever I try to explain Unitarian Universalism, we are a value-based church is most likely to slip out. But basing our whole communal lives on values is just throwing the doors right open for all the hypocrites to show up. I'm reminded of the man who was asked why he had started attending church and said, "Well, I heard that Jesus called for the vilest of all sinners to come to him, and I'll be darned if I've ever felt more invited anywhere in my life." I don't necessarily want the vilest of all hypocrites, because there are some real nasty ones out there. But I think the time is far past that we should make our welcome of hypocrites official. I'm really surprised that during my time here as an intern, no one asked me to write a new motto for FUS. But if it was up to me, I'd hang a big sign right out from the prow of the landmark auditorium where that old copper bell used to be. First Unitarian Society, home of hypocrites and hippies. But mostly just hypocrites. And I mean this in the very best sense. Because this is my story as much as it is yours, like all my sermons. I once saw a cartoon graph that I adored. One line rising steadily up was what I expected of myself. Another line crawled up much slower and was labeled what I actually achieved. And in this graph, the increasingly large empty space between the two lines was filled with one word: beer. I think we should make a good attempt to try to fill that space with church, or at least some of that space. What my 32 years in the human family has taught me is that living up to your values is a choice for almost no one. We are far too human to live up to who we want to be. I think most of us, most everyone I've met, is exactly 32% a hypocrite. And it's going up 1% each year I'm alive. I plan on being a very cynical 75-year-old. And while most of us don't get to choose to be that 32% a hypocrite, I do think what we get to choose is what our hypothetical 100% looks like. This button. Just give me a hard time. I do think what we get to choose is what our hypothetical 100% looks like. So, low expectations for ourselves might make our 32% hypocrisy feel smaller, but it also makes our 68% authenticity feel that much smaller. We are the church of unusually high expectations for humanity. The sign is getting a little long. Where we thrive is in helping people find the strength to expand their vision of the possibility inherent in human nature. But we very often fail to recognize that we are also opening ourselves up to the deep vulnerability of similarly expanding our experience of the hypocrisy inherent in that human nature. Now, I'm not arguing that we be proud of the size of our hypocrisy, but I think we can and must take pride in how and when we have forged on in spite of that hypocrisy. When the temptation comes to shrink at the dark parts of our soul, to gain distance and security, our great effort must be in approaching that darkness and giving it the care it needs to be transformed into something else. This place, from the moment I walked in, was a place of life renewed, of courage found, of community unfolded. But reflecting on my reading from Clarissa Pinkola Estes, I am forced to admit that this place was also a place of great death. In love, everything becomes picked apart, she reminds us. Illusions die, expectations die. Greed for having it all, for wanting to have all be beautiful only. All this dies. In a very welcome way, the birth of a new kind of faith, a new kind of religion, death dueled my Mormon faith to its mostly peaceful end. But much more sorrowfully, it also saw the death of many of my expectations about what a life free from the constraints of that conservative religion would look like. Yes, I had my first coffee here. Yes, I had my first beer here. Yes, people were much more politically aligned with me than I had come to experience in Mormonism. But the people here, much to my chagrin, turned out to be no closer to perfection than anywhere else. What I did find at FUS was a more perfect mirror. I often have said that I've taken the spiritual development track of all the different possible tracks seminary and an internship could take. I was and am still deeply unsure if I am a good fit for ministry or if it is a good fit for me. So I tried to look both deeply inside of myself and deeply inside of the institution I had thoughts of dedicating my life to. And what I have found deep inside both is nothing but a mirror. A terribly, wonderfully fragile mirror. Now, we all know that the best mirrors are the most fragile. I don't know if that's actually true, but let's all pretend it is for the sake of this metaphor. It has been both wonderfully comforting and terribly convicting to find that there is nothing deep inside except what I bring there. And what we bring there, the experiences, the connections, the convictions, and yes, the hypocrisy. I feel like most of my life I have sought out sturdy, hard mirrors that I can trust, not to break, like this faux polished granite, and found that they reflect back only the bright parts of life and blur them into near meaninglessness. The destination, the goal I've learned, is not an end, but a clearer picture of the journey, and both in its wonder and its wretchedness. And while this internship has almost certainly been the year where I've seen where that 32% hypocrisy has appeared in its most awful clarity, it has also been the year where I'm humble enough to admit that 68% authenticity has shown most clearly through in its soft, golden hues. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Yes, what I found here was a church full of hypocrites and hippies, but mostly hypocrites. And I fell immediately in love because I knew it was a place where my concepts of love and its limits would be challenged in a way that would help me grow into the person I knew I was supposed to be, where a more perfect mirror would be held up to my life, both the good and the bad. Because, as Pema Chodron says, when we truly confront our wretchedness and hold it in balance with our gloriousness, wretchedness can soften us up considerably. Gloriousness and wretchedness support each other. One inspires us, the other softens us. They go together. I keep looking up at the balcony crowd, and they're just not there. Let us recenter for just a moment in this space. When Frank Lloyd Wright designed the Meeting House, and yes, I've been to the archives, all you tour guides, and confirmed this, he had plans on installing multiple water features to balance the blue pools with our red floors, including a large reflecting pool where our parking lot is now, that's included in most drawings, most sketches, but also a below-ground pool that extended from the terrace outside of the loggia, under the floor of the loggia, right up to the western doors of the landmark auditorium. It would have been awesome. Of course, the pools were apparently the first things to get cut with the budget. And the floors stayed. Certainly a wise choice. If we struggled to repair the roof, imagine how we would have done raising funds to repair the koi pond. But since we have no physical pools to soften our backbone of stone, my charge to you today is that we, each of us, must become those soft pools. We are, each one of us, called to preach softness to a world that has grown so incredibly hard. On this Memorial Day weekend, I think we can all recognize that our country has consistently, communally, and most often disastrously chosen the hard appearance of strength over the soft. And the lives of thousands of our men, women, and genderqueer folks who chose or were compelled into service have suffered the life-altering consequences, along with countless others who have been at the receiving ends of those shows of strength. Right now, I added this line in, it was a mistake. Right now, we are actively witnessing children torn from their parents' arms. From their parents' arms on a daily basis, all in the name of border security. Yes, our hard strength that takes so many forms beyond brute military might does often in reality protect us. And there is so much in this world that needs real protecting. But it is not our hardness that will save us, but our softness. That strength and hardness will not do. And not a softness that comes despite our hypocrisy, but the softness that comes from learning to hold our hypocrisy and our lust and our sloth and all our failings in the tender embrace of our full selves. The great pseudo-love of Unitarian Universalism, to get back to James Luther Adams, is the love that says, when you're good enough, when you're right enough, then you will be worthy of love. The great temptation of the liberal church will always be to use our machinations of moral strength to attempt to turn our soft parts hard. But the great redemption will be when we are able to use our soft parts, our weaknesses, to turn our hard spots soft. Only this tender embrace will save. Thank you. Before we go on, I'd like to thank our volunteers for today. Our sound operator, David Briles. Am I saying that right, David Briles? I'm sorry. Dorrit Bergen is our worship associate. Our greeter is Pamela McMullen. Our usher is Tom Dolmage, Ann Ostrom, Marty Hollis. Our coffee is being made today by Nancy Kosif, Sandra Plish. Our flowers today are offered by Joanne and Alan Heitman, and our tour guide is John Powell. And if you'd like a tour of this building, I don't know if John's here. Did I see him? I think I did. Well, you can gather here underneath this window, and the tour guide may or may not show you around the building. Our offering today goes to a group that even in my poorer days of seminary, I tried to support. 100% of the gifts received in today's offering will be given to the Unitarian Universalist Association to help fund their Promise and Practice campaign for the Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism. This nationwide campaign asks congregations to take the lead in the effort to collectively work to dismantle white supremacy culture and connect our finances with our theological values. Please be generous.
TK has disappeared. I presume he's coming back for the benediction. There he is. So TK is the 10th and the last of the ministerial interns that I have had the pleasure and the honor of supervising during my time here at First Unitarian Society. And each of these men and women have been distinctive in their own right. And each has brought to us here at FUS fresh ideas, innovative ways of conducting worship, and of educating members of the congregation. While I, as the supervisor, and you, as the congregation, have provided these interns with opportunities to find their footing as prospective ministers, they in turn have served us with a rich assortment of gifts and talents. As someone who found his way into our faith tradition via First Unitarian Society, and who then decided to prepare for a possible career in ministry as the result of that experience, it was especially gratifying to have spent the last 10 months working with T.K. Browning. There is no doubt that T.K. has a mind of his own, and he has exhibited a willingness, perhaps even an eagerness, to take calculated risks at times, like calling out our hypocrisy, for instance. And as a result, there have been a few surprises along the way these past 10 months. And in this respect, you know what, I recognize myself at the tender age of 32, and for the most part, I found, at his age, that a little audacity served both me and my congregations well. It's too easy to get trapped in the tried and true patterns that can lead to a bit of stagnation. Now, as an intern, however, you always have the benefit of sympathetic in-house mentors and observers who can provide you with invaluable feedback, and I hope that's been true for you. That is not always true when you have been called to serve your own congregation. Nevertheless, I will miss the rich conversations that TK and Kelly and I have had weekly in the course of this internship. I will miss the collegiality that I have enjoyed with TK as he gained confidence and took on more and more serious responsibilities. I will miss Caitlin and the kids. I will miss TK and his millennialist challenges to my own baby boomer sensitivities, although my own son will easily fill that void. And so TK, you shall be missed. While here, you have helped to validate the importance of First Unitarian Society as a teaching church, a teaching congregation. And at some point in your own work life, if life carries you in this direction, I hope that the experience of working with the next generation of UU ministers will mean as much to you as it has to me. Thank you. And now Lorna, I'd like for her to step forward. Lorna has served on our ministerial intern support committees for the last 5 years. Maybe even before that, but we've had a succession of 5 interns, TK being the last in recent history.
No, we'll pass the mic. Thanks. I'd first like to introduce the intern ministry team. The Unitarian Universalist Association requires that in addition to professional mentors and supervisors, interns have a lay group that gives them the experience of getting feedback of all sorts, as TK will, as he becomes a minister, and to learn how to listen to lay people and the feedback that we all give so generously to our ministers. Michael and Kelly can attest to that. So I'd like to acknowledge a couple of people who couldn't be here today. Ann Gullickson and Luke Anderman are not here. Katie Beam, Andy Levy, and Kirsten Sieber, and I'm Lorna Aronson. The presentation of the notebook is one of the rituals that we've developed with our interns for the last 5 years. In case you haven't had an opportunity to leave a message for TK's notebook, these sheets will be out at a table in the Commons, and I hope that you'll leave a message that he'll carry with you. First of all, it's our tradition to leave you with these messages that really represent just a few of the people whose lives you've touched over the last 10 months. And so I hope that as you go on your journey and you begin to reflect back on what this was for you, that you will take a look at the notebook and read a message of a few of the people whose lives you've touched for the last year. And now Kirsten.
So we also would like to give you a little bit of the meeting house to take with you. You're gonna be my Vanna. Inside is a chalice that was made by Dave Weber, and it was made from some stone from the meeting house. And then Lorna made the lovely box with some iconic FUS images. And I hope that you think of all of us every time you fire that thing up.
Please turn to 685 and the gray hymnal for the unison reading, and rise in body or in spirit. What we call a beginning is often the end, and to make an end is to make a beginning. The end is where we start from. We shall not cease from exploration, and at the end of all our exploring, we will arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. Hymn number 1. Please stay standing.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here together. Our service here has ended, but our service to the world is beginning once again. Please be seated, go in peace, and enjoy the postlude.
course.